This is why you have to take time to process everything and not jump into, let's ban this, let's ban that, let's ban high-capacity magazines, because if you just shoot that off and say, oh, we got to do this because of what happened in Florida. Well, if we don't know the details, what's the point? Now that we're learning the details, we're seeing high-capacity magazines aren't the problem. Let's go to the phones. And joining us right now, Congressman Jodey Arrington. Good morning, Congressman.
Good morning, Chad. Good to be with you this morning.
Yeah, glad to have you on the show. Well, obviously, I was just talking about what happened in Florida, and everyone is still talking about the Second Amendment, still talking about school safety. I know y'all are going to have to deal with some piece of legislation, or two or three maybe, that eventually comes out of this. We heard from the president yesterday. We've heard from the president on some other on other issues. What would you like to see if Speaker Paul Ryan came to you and President came to you and said, what's the Arrington Plan? What would the Arrington Plan look like?
Well, I'd say the key objective is to keep the American people safe while preserving their fundamental God-given right to protect themselves from bad guys and bad governments. And that's you've got to start. Everything I've ever done in business or politics, you always put that objective down. And we also, I would remind them, I don't know if they need reminding, but I would say, look, we don't have the Second Amendment because of a strong tradition of hunting in this country. We don't have the Second Amendment just because of the inherent right of self-defense. We have it because we couldn't fight and win our independence, and we couldn't protect ourselves and be the last check on the check and balance of a country gone rogue and a tyrannical government. That is the basis, and I that is what I would start with, Chad, because I think I'm not saying people are confused. We got to go back to the original intent, because history is littered with bad people who do bad things, and then when they take over governments, they use that government to do a lot worse than what happened in Florida, and we've got to protect that. But there are things we can do. I'll pause there, but then I would give some advice on what I think we can do and where I think it broke down, not just in Florida, but in Sutherland Springs.
Well, let's talk about this a little bit further. What do you think can be done, and does this tie into the Fix NICS bill that Senator John Cornyn has proposed?
Well, listen, I already voted on the Fix NICS when we voted on the reciprocity bill. I believe part of the defense, part of the hardening of security is the last line of defense, because things will break down. Bureaucracies will fail you. I mean, that's what big government is failing us. It failed us with the FBI. They're still getting the facts, but it looks like even the local law enforcement didn't do their job appropriately. So what do? You put your fate in your hands, and the kids' fates in the hands of folks who can respond on the scene immediately, and so you protect their rights to defend themselves. So I think that you've got to harden the schools. I think you've got to do what we do in Texas and allow teachers to arm themselves, license and train teachers and coaches and administrators. And then I think we've got to turn over every rock and make sure that we, the government at all levels, is doing their job. That's the saddest part of the story, is that the community did their job by being aware, raising the red flags, and then nobody followed up and followed through. They didn't identify, register, and respond the way they were supposed to do it. That's not the gun's fault. In fact, if we'd have had the guy in Sutherland Springs that grabbed his gun, exercised his right, if it weren't for that citizen doing his duty, we'd have had probably more deaths in Sutherland Springs. So that's where I would focus, Chad. I do think that's the breakdown. So if you're going to solve a problem, you got to look at the facts and then solve the problem that way. And then, as I mentioned, that's where I'd focus.
What about this idea of the temporary restraining order that has come up, where family or even law enforcement would, in theory, I guess, go to the court system and try to get a temporary restraining order on someone's Second Amendment rights? What do you think about that idea?
Well, and let me say, because and hearken to some of the things that I heard the president say, and I didn't watch the whole discussion live, but that we need to. I voted on a bill, by the way, that restored what I believe is the right way to determine if somebody's mentally unstable or unfit, and that is through the courts, and that's through adjudication, not through some bureaucracy like they had it with Social Security agency. So I feel the same way. I think the courts, quite frankly, I think you could do a temporary restraining order. If somebody was presenting immediate or imminent danger and threat to themselves or to their community, their family, as long as you get the facts, you present them to a judge, and it is very short. And because anything too long is to not give them due process and take away their fundamental right. So I think done right, I don't have a problem with that if it's done the right way. But again, this notion that we take people's guns and then we go to the courts after is completely upside down, and I oppose that.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. What about raising the age to 21 to purchase a semi-automatic rifle?
Well, I'm going to say a couple things about that. Semi-automatic, look, the Virginia Tech student and shooting was a guy that used pistols, and he did twice as much damage. The guy in Nice, France, that ran over and killed 80-plus people and injured over 400 used a vehicle. We had gun-wielding thugs in southwestern China knife twice as many people that were gunned down at the school. So, I mean, let's all take a deep breath and remember that it's bad people and crazy people, deranged people that are with murderous intent are the ones that we've got to stop. I think if you're 18 and you can take up arms to defend our nation, you ought to be able to take up arms to defend yourself, your neighborhood, and your community. That's how I feel about it. Can you at 18, if you can fly an Apache helicopter or an F-16 if you can drive a tank, or if you can take up arms to defend the United States, then I think you ought to be able to take up arms to defend yourself and your family. That's how I feel about it.
But before we take our first break, overall, what do you think has a realistic chance of getting through? Because I heard Speaker Ryan, I believe it was yesterday or the day before, say anything going after guns is not going to get through. It's not going to get through the House. He's not going to allow that to happen. And I don't think most Republicans in the House would allow that to happen.
They wouldn't.
So what do you think realistically would get through? Background checks?
Yeah, the fix NICS is to shore up the background check side, which it needs to be. Look, I mean, the federal government and the military base didn't report the violent background of that individual in Sutherland Springs. That's a hole. And if those folks aren't held accountable, they should be. The FBI should be held accountable. They've got bigger problems over there than even what we're talking about right now. So, yes, look, we either believe in the background check and that process for making sure that the bad guys don't get guns, or we don't. I do. So let's make sure it works. It's that simple. But let's not look. One thing, Chad, when you see folks from a certain religion blow things up, blow people up, take planes and run them into buildings, why don't we have religious worship control? Why don't we have Muslim religious worship control? We don't. And the same thing on censorship with freedom of speech. But every time we have an incident like this, people have a knee-jerk reaction, but it's our job as people who believe strongly in the Second Amendment and conservatives to do what we can to keep our kids safe, our schools safe, but also fight and protect for that Second Amendment right.
Congressman, we need to take the break. When we come back, we have other things to get into with you, and we'll do that on the other side of the break. 770-5790, 1-800-687-0790. Chad Hasty Show, KFYO. We continue our discussion with Congressman Jodey Arrington. And Congressman, you were recently appointed to the Select Committee on Budget and Appropriations Process Reform by Speaker Ryan. What does that mean for those who want to know what exactly that means and why that's a good thing?
Well, it's a big honor for us because we're the only freshmen. We're 2 out of the 4 are chairmen, and the other's a senior guy that's on rules and appropriations and budget. So the speaker and I've talked about my interest and passion in the solving the deficit spending and the national debt looming crisis, and that's we talk a lot about that. And I won't say there's not a panacea here, but the process is broken. That's why we get these omnibuses dropped on us instead of going through regular order. Although we went through regular order my first year, voted for every appropriations bill, had a budget, it all broke down in the Senate. The 60-vote rule's a problem. So we're going to look at everything. This joint, it's a bipartisan, bicameral. That means Senate and House, and we've got a West Texas representation on there, and I think it's a big deal for us. But it's certainly personally the issue that I will not let go, and what I will pursue as long as I'm in this seat, because it's the biggest threat to the future for my children and everybody else that's listening.
Talk a little bit about the Vet Protection Act. I know you were able to discuss this with some veterans recently.
Yeah, the disabled American veterans were in town. A lot of these groups, veteran service organizations, are coming through. And look, I'm not getting as much traction from the Democrats. We passed it out of the committee. I want it in the House. My friend Senator Ted Cruz has introduced it in the Senate now, and I'm going straight to the veterans with it. And when they show up, I'm telling them this is it's crazy. We've done all these great things with the choice for health care for veterans, et cetera, new GI Bill, accountability to fire bad people at the VA, but the unions still have a stronghold, and they're spending 100% of their time, hundreds of them, on union activity, and I think that's an outrage to me. So anyway, I'm trying to stir up the support from veterans and taking it to the veteran and trying to bypass some of these Washington associations that I think sometimes get caught up in the Washington culture. So I'm hopeful we can move that forward.
Visiting with Congressman Jodey Arrington, obviously this week and has been a big focus on the issue of the Second Amendment and guns, but I'm sure you are working on a lot of other issues. What are some of those big issues that Congress is working on right now?
Well, we solved the biggest problem for the Farm Bill, which was getting cotton back into the safety net. However, we still have infrastructure related to high-speed Internet access for rural communities. That's a big one. And we have some other components of the Farm Bill. And then we've got the broader infrastructure. Want to make sure, again, that the food, fuel, and fiber areas have the right arteries to take it to the port cities and take it throughout the country safely and efficiently. So just being a voice for rural America on those things. And then lastly, and probably as important as anything, is we've got 6 million surplus jobs. We got too many people who are in a cycle of dependency on welfare, who are able-bodied and could go and work. And number one, for the dignity of work itself for these individuals, but also because we need the labor and in the economy to keep it growing. And lastly, it's the right thing to do as a fiduciary for the taxpayers. So welfare to work and reforming food stamps and other government assistance for people, able-bodied people, we ought to require, not just ask, not grant waivers if, then, such and such. No, if you're able-bodied, you need to work.
Any talk on NAFTA in Congress right now?
No, they're kind of wrapping things up there. I think there's some really good improvements that I'm hearing with respect to e-commerce and dispute resolution, making those more efficient. The problem has been the manufacturing, not really ag, so the ag guys are really nervous. But I think we do no harm on ag, and let's fix some of the other things. I mean, we're Americans first, Chad, and we want all American producers to thrive and have a fair trade deal and go head-to-head, just like we want the ag producers. So I want those manufacturers to support me when I'm asking to help the ag guys, and I'm going to help those manufacturers if it's not a good deal. This president is negotiating from strength. I still support everything he's doing in that regard.
Congressman Jodey Arrington, as always, appreciate your time. We'll visit with you in a couple of weeks.
Hey, blessings. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Have a good one. That's Congressman Jodey Arrington here on the Chad Hasty Show.